The child that everyone said died from measles didn't die from measles. She died from medical malpractice. The parents did an interview a few days ago explaining exactly what happened at the hospital, and there was red flag after red flag. It's important to know that this family is a Mennonite family, and yes, they are known to not taking the measles vaccine, but the wife actually said that she believes she had it as a child. But the entire family got measles, including her. Everyone recovered but their daughter. Dr. Kory just went step by step on what happened. He had access to all of the medical records, and it's devastating what took place.
One, you put them on two antibiotics to cover all the possibilities. And unfortunately, this case gets a lot worse than that. Because not only did they use an inappropriate antibiotic, so they used ceftriaxone, which was correct, they added something called vancomycin to it, which works similarly, and it covers very drug-resistant organisms like MRSA. There's no reason to think that this child would come in with MRSA from the community, from a Mennonite community. She's not coming from a facility where a lot of antibiotics are used. So it was a really, it's a grievous error. And it's an error which led to her death. And, so when I say it gets worse, she's in the hospital deteriorating. And, one of the fundamental teaching points that I've made throughout my career to my residents, to my fellows, to my students, is I always tell them, if what you're doing is not working, change what you're doing. And although this child was declining, they never changed what they were doing until the test came back for mycoplasma. And this is where it gets really troubling, because as an ICU doctor, when I need a new antibiotic, I identify an organism in someone who's critically ill. When I order that antibiotic has standards. It should arrive within at least 2 hours. And from my review of the records, the antibiotic was ordered 11 p.m., or approximately 11 p.m. And as far as I can tell, it was not administered until 9 a.m. the next morning. It was actually written to start the next day. And so not only did you have several days delay of decline without the appropriate antibiotic, but then when they realized that they were missing the appropriate antibiotic, it took them, as far as I can tell, 10 hours to administer it. And by that time, she was already on a ventilator, and approximately 24 hours later, actually less than 24 hours later, she died. And she died rather catastrophically. As she was declining, she was in a state of what's called shock, and she needed medicines to maintain her blood pressure. And suddenly her blood pressures crashed and she arrested. And that kind of suddenness in an infection suggests some other cardiac event. And in a child like that, with that amount of inflammation, infection, and disturbances in the bloodstream, I can only surmise that she died of a catastrophic pulmonary embolus. But by the time that happened, there's not a lot you can do. There's some stuff you can do. You can use clot-busting medications, and I've done that in the middle of cardiac arrest before, and I've had a couple of rescues, but it's not a high probability that you do that. But, rather than focusing on that final event that caused her death, it really was all of the missteps that occurred. And so this, like you said, Brian, she was recovering from measles, getting a secondary bacterial pneumonia. And let me give the hospital some credit. They correctly diagnosed her. They very quickly on admission realized that she was coming in with a secondary bacterial pneumonia. And I think that was an absolutely correct diagnosis. The treatment was absolutely incorrect. And when I say it has little to do with measles, secondary bacterial pneumonias can happen after any viral infection. And so, this is not, we're all, everyone's grandstanding and all this outrage over this measles. You see the media is going nuts about how everyone needs to get vaccinated. I would tell you just simple, straightforward, correct medical care. We've been treating pneumonias for decades with antibiotics, and this was just a tragic error of an insufficient and incorrect antibiotic regimen on admission.
In summary, the hospital made two big mistakes and did one thing right. The thing that they did right was they knew that this was pneumonia. They weren't treating the measles. The thing that they did wrong is they put her on antibiotics that were the wrong ones, and even after days of decline, they didn't change the regimen. Then finally, after they get official test results showing exactly which antibiotic would actually improve her condition, they delayed giving it to her for 10 hours. By that time, it was too late. Now, this other doctor talked directly with the parents, and I think it's really important to hear what he has to say.
And I remember that reporter grabbing his phone, and the alert just came from the news alert, just announced first measles death. There was almost a giddiness in his response. It was disgusting, actually. And I want people to know Peter doesn't want this information to be used on the other side in the same almost getting this kind of way of aha, we got you. He simply wants the truth to be told so that other kids who potentially could go down the same path as his daughter won't have to. He has a pure, loving heart and a motivation that's pure, and he wanted me to share that and express that, and he wanted this to be public for that very reason.
The past 22 years, there's only been 2 measles deaths, even though there's been thousands of cases of measles within that time. And both of those deaths actually weren't from measles. The first woman that died about 10 years ago had other chronic diseases, and they didn't find the measles until after her death. And the child, as we've talked about, didn't die from measles. It was pneumonia that wasn't treated properly. We need to stop weaponizing this conversation and using it as a marketing ploy to get vaccinated. Healthy people do not die from measles. You can even ask your grandparents. Everyone had measles back in like the 50s. People can get injuries from the MMR vaccine itself, and there are reported injuries. So it should be up to all of us to make our own decisions on whether or not we get vaccinated. But we need to stop weaponizing this conversation and let people make this decision for themselves and with their doctor. Instead of being distracted by vaccines, we need to focus on the root of the problem here, which was medical malpractice, so we can ensure that this doesn't happen to another child again.